The fluorescent lights of the old gas station flickered ominously as Daniel clocked in for another night shift. Located on a desolate stretch of highway, Harper's Gas and Convenience was a relic from another era, with its peeling paint and vintage pumps. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by time, where the nights stretched on interminably, punctuated only by the occasional customer and the relentless hum of the refrigeration units. Daniel had been working there for 6 months, a job he had taken out of necessity rather than choice. The hours were long and the pay meager, but it was a job and it kept him occupied. The other employees avoided the night shift, passing it off as too quiet, too lonely. But Daniel didn't mind the solitude until the strange occurrences began. It started with the sounds. At first, it was just a faint tapping, barely audible over the hum of the lights. Then it grew louder, more insistent, like someone or something trying to get his attention. He would check the security monitors, but they showed nothing but the empty lot and the dark highway beyond. He tried to dismiss it as the old building settling, but a nagging sense of unease settled in the back of his mind. One night, as Daniel was stocking shelves, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, expecting to see a customer, but the store was empty. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He forced himself to continue working, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Around 2 a.m., a car pulled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Daniel watched as a man got out and began pumping gas. The customer was tall, with a weathered face and dark eyes that seemed to glint unnervingly in the harsh lights. After a few minutes, the man came inside to pay. "Quiet night, huh?" the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "Yeah, pretty quiet," Daniel replied, forcing a smile. The man handed over a crumpled bill and some change. As Daniel rang up the transaction, the man leaned closer, his eyes boring into Daniel's. "You should be careful out here. Strange things happen on nights like this." Before Daniel could respond, the man turned and walked out, leaving him with a lingering sense of dread. He watched the car disappear into the darkness, the taillights fading until they were swallowed by the night. Daniel shook off the encounter and returned to his duties, but the man's words echoed in his mind. Strange things happen on nights like this. He tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting to the odd noises and the feeling of being watched. Around 3 a.m., the lights began to flicker again. Daniel cursed under his breath and went to the back room to check the breaker box. As he fumbled with the switches, he heard a faint whispering sound, like voices murmuring just out of earshot. He turned, but the room was empty. He returned to the front of the store, only to find the lights had gone out completely. The darkness was oppressive, the only illumination coming from the dim emergency lights. Daniel felt his way to the counter and grabbed a flashlight. As he clicked it on, the beam cut through the darkness, revealing the empty aisles and the reflections in the glass doors. He heard the footsteps again, this time louder, more distinct. They seemed to come from the back of the store. Heart pounding, Daniel followed the sound, his flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The footsteps led him to the storage room, a place he rarely had to enter during his shift. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, the musty smell of old cardboard and cleaning supplies filling his nostrils. The footsteps stopped abruptly, leaving him in an oppressive silence. He swept the room with his flashlight, but saw nothing unusual. Just as he was about to turn back, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye, a small door he had never seen before, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes. Daniel's curiosity got the better of him. He moved the boxes aside and examined the door. It was old and warped, with a rusted handle. He hesitated for a moment, then grasped the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. A cold draft wafted up from the stairs, carrying with it a faint metallic smell. Daniel hesitated, a sense of foreboding settling over him. He considered closing the door and pretending he had never seen it, but something compelled him to descend. He took a deep breath and started down the stairs, the flashlight beam flickering with each step. The air grew colder, the metallic smell stronger. At the bottom of the stairs, he found himself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old, decaying photographs, their subjects staring out with hollow eyes. In the center of the room was an old wooden table, its surface stained dark. As Daniel approached the table, he saw an old leather-bound book lying open. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in a spidery script that he couldn't decipher. He reached out to touch the book, and a chill ran down his spine. The whispers returned, louder now, filling the room with their eerie cadence. He spun around, the flashlight beam revealing a figure standing in the doorway. It was the man from earlier, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "I warned you," the man said, his voice a raspy whisper. "You shouldn't have come down here." Before Daniel could react, the man lunged at him, and the room plunged into darkness. He felt cold hands grip his arms, pulling him down. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and the darkness closed in around him. When Daniel awoke, he was lying on the cold, hard floor of the storage room. The door was gone, the staircase vanished. He stumbled to his feet, his mind racing. He ran to the front of the store, the lights flickering back to life as he emerged. The clock on the wall read 4 a.m., but it felt as though he'd been down there for hours. He tried to shake off the terror that clung to him, but the feeling of being watched remained. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't stay there another night. He quit his job and left the gas station behind, hoping to escape the nightmares that had begun to plague him. But even after he left, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him. The whispers haunted his dreams, and the feeling of cold hands gripping his arms jolted him awake at night. He moved to a new town, started a new job, but the sense of dread never left him. One night, months later, as he walked home from work, he saw a familiar figure standing under a streetlight. It was the man from the gas station, his eyes glinting in the darkness. "You can't escape," the man whispered, his voice echoing in Daniel's mind. Daniel turned and ran, but the whispers followed, growing louder and more insistent. He knew then that he would never be free. The darkness had claimed him, and there was no escaping its grasp. And so, the gas station remained, a relic of forgotten nightmares, waiting for its next victim to wander in and uncover the horrors that lay hidden within its walls. And on quiet nights, when the wind howls and the darkness presses in, you can still hear the whispers of those who were lost, forever trapped in the shadows. The gas station was an old, run-down establishment on the edge of town, far enough from the main road that only the occasional traveler or local would stop by. Mark had been working the night shift for several months, finding comfort in the solitude and the steady hum of fluorescent lights. It was an easy job, stocking shelves, ringing up the rare customer, and cleaning up before dawn. But lately, the nights had grown increasingly unsettling. It started with small things, a shadow flickering at the edge of his vision, the faint sound of footsteps when he knew he was alone, and the oppressive silence that seemed to deepen as the hours crept by. Mark chalked it up to fatigue and the eerie nature of the night shift. But as the weeks passed, the incidents became harder to ignore. One particularly cold and quiet night, Mark was restocking the cooler when he heard the sound of someone shuffling across the floor. He poked his head out, expecting to see a customer, but the station was empty. The door hadn't chimed, and the security monitor showed no sign of movement. Unease settled in his stomach, but he shook it off and returned to his work. A few hours later, as he was mopping the floor, the lights began to flicker. The power surged, causing the ancient radio on the counter to crackle to life, playing a distorted old tune that sent shivers down Mark's spine. He unplugged it, but the static continued, filling the room with an unnerving buzz. He glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m., the witching hour. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. As the night dragged on, Mark tried to distract himself with mundane tasks, but the feeling of being watched persisted. He decided to check the storage room, thinking maybe a stray animal had gotten inside. The room was dark and cluttered, filled with old boxes and forgotten supplies. As he searched, he found an old wooden trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of boxes. He had never noticed it before. Curiosity got the better of him, and he pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and musty, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decay. Against his better judgment, Mark grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs. The basement was a maze of narrow corridors and small rooms, filled with more old boxes and forgotten relics. The walls were covered in strange, faded symbols that seemed to pulse in the beam of his flashlight. As he ventured deeper, he heard faint whispers, just at the edge of his hearing. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent and desperate. Mark's heart pounded as he followed the whispers to a small, windowless room at the far end of the basement. Inside, he found an old, rusted bed frame and a few scattered belongings. It looked like someone had been living there long ago. On the floor, partially hidden by debris, was a small, leather-bound journal. He picked it up, his hands trembling. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with cramped handwriting. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas, who had worked the night shift at the gas station decades earlier. As Mark read, he felt a growing sense of dread. Thomas wrote of strange occurrences, voices in the night, shadowy figures that moved just out of sight, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. He described the basement in detail, mentioning the same symbols that Mark had seen. But the last few entries were the most disturbing. July 12, 1975. I can hear them again. The whispers are getting louder and I can't escape them. I tried to tell Mr. Harper, but he wouldn't listen. He said I was imagining things, but I know the truth. This place is cursed. There's something down here, something evil. July 14, 1975. They're coming for me. I can feel it. I haven't slept in days, and the shadows are closing in. If anyone finds this journal, leave this place. Burn it down. Don't let it consume you like it did me. Mark's blood ran cold. He slammed the journal shut and turned to leave, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. He stumbled back up the stairs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The basement door slammed shut behind him with a deafening crash. Back in the main store, the lights continued to flicker. The radio crackled to life again, the distorted music now accompanied by a faint, chilling laughter. Mark backed away, his eyes darting around the room. He could feel the presence now, a cold, suffocating force that seemed to press in from all sides. Desperate, he grabbed his keys and ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were dark, the outside world obscured by a thick, unnatural fog. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the store, merging into a cacophony of voices. In the reflection of the store window, Mark saw them. Shadowy figures with hollow eyes watching him, their mouths moving in silent screams. The temperature dropped, and his breath fogged the glass. He turned to face them. His back against the door, and they moved closer, their forms flickering in and out of existence. He felt a cold hand grip his shoulder, and he screamed, the sound echoing through the empty store. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was the reflection of his own terrified face, surrounded by the ghostly figures that had haunted him. When the morning shift worker arrived, they found the gas station empty. The lights were off, the store in disarray. There was no sign of Mark, except for the journal left on the counter, open to the last desperate entry. The words were smeared, as if written in haste. July 15, 1975. They're here. Don't stay. Don't listen to the whispers. The worker called the police, but the investigation turned up nothing. Mark was declared missing, and the gas station was eventually abandoned, left to decay. Locals whispered of the cursed place, warning others to stay away. And on dark, stormy nights, those who ventured too close swore they could still hear the whispers of the lost souls echoing through the empty gas station, forever trapped in the darkness. The rain poured down in torrents, the kind of relentless downpour that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Jenna squinted through the windshield, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. She had been driving for hours, trying to get home before the storm hit, but now she was caught in its fury. The GPS signal had been lost miles back, and she felt hopelessly lost in the labyrinth of back roads and endless forest. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, the engine sputtered and died. The car rolled to a stop, and Jenna let out a frustrated sigh. She tried the ignition, but it was no use. The car was dead. She sat there for a moment, letting the reality of her situation sink in. She was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and a storm raging outside. As she pondered her next move, she noticed a faint glow through the sheets of rain, a neon sign flickering in the distance. It was an old gas station, its lights barely cutting through the darkness. Jenna grabbed her raincoat and flashlight, bracing herself against the wind and rain as she made her way toward the station. The gas station was dilapidated, its windows boarded up and the paint peeling off in large chunks. The sign above the entrance flickered ominously, "Harper's Gas and Service." Jenna tried the door, and to her surprise, it creaked open. She stepped inside, grateful to be out of the rain, but the air inside was musty and stale. She shone her flashlight around the room, revealing dusty shelves stocked with ancient, expired products. The place had clearly been abandoned for years. The only sound was the steady drumming of rain on the roof and the occasional creak of the building settling. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing in the empty space. There was no response. She felt a shiver run down her spine, but she pushed the feeling aside. She needed to find a phone or some way to contact help. Jenna moved deeper into the gas station, her flashlight beam dancing over the worn linoleum floor. She found a door marked "Office" and pushed it open. The room beyond was small and cluttered, with an old desk and a rotary phone sitting atop it. She picked up the phone, but there was no dial tone. Frustrated, she slammed it down. As she turned to leave, she noticed a door slightly ajar at the back of the office. She pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air wafting up from the basement was cold and damp, carrying with it a faint metallic smell. Something told her to turn back, but curiosity and desperation drove her forward. She descended the stairs cautiously, her flashlight revealing cobwebs and damp concrete walls. At the bottom, she found herself in a large, open space filled with old machinery and discarded junk. As she explored the basement, her flashlight flickered and went out. She cursed under her breath, smacking it against her palm until the light sputtered back to life. When the beam returned, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A door at the far end of the room, slightly ajar, with a faint light spilling out. Jenna approached the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She pushed it open and stepped inside, the light from a single, naked bulb revealing a makeshift living space. There was a cot in one corner, a small table with a few personal items, and a wall covered in newspaper clippings. She moved closer, her eyes scanning the headlines: "Local girl missing, disappearance mystery deepens, no leads in missing persons case." The clippings were old, yellowed with age, and as Jenna read them, a sense of unease settled over her. She felt like she was being watched. A sudden creak behind her made her spin around, her flashlight beam catching a glimpse of movement. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and Jenna's heart leapt into her throat. It was an old man, his face gaunt and eyes hollow. He looked at her with a mixture of surprise and anger. "What are you doing here?" he rasped, his voice echoing in the confined space. I was just looking for help," Jenna stammered. "My car broke down, and I saw the lights." The man's expression softened slightly, but there was still a coldness in his eyes. "This place is dangerous. You shouldn't be here." Jenna took a step back, her mind racing. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, then sighed. "My name is Harold. I used to run this station years ago, but things happened. Bad things." Jenna's curiosity got the better of her fear. What happened here? Harold's gaze shifted to the wall of clippings. People started disappearing. It started with a little girl, then more followed. The police searched, but they never found anything. The station closed, but I stayed. I had to stay. Jenna felt a chill run down her spine. "Why did you stay?" Harold's eyes bore into hers. "Because the station is cursed. Once you step foot here, it doesn't let you leave." Jenna shook her head, refusing to believe it. "That's ridiculous. I'm leaving right now." Harold reached out, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. "No, you don't understand. It feeds on fear. The more you try to leave, the stronger it gets." Jenna wrenched her arm free and ran up the stairs, her heart pounding. She burst out of the office and into the rain, but her relief was short-lived. The gas station seemed to loom larger, the darkness around it pressing in like a living thing. She ran to her car, but it was dead, the hood open and the engine exposed. She hadn't left it that way. Panic set in as she realized she was trapped. She turned back to the gas station, and there, standing in the doorway, was Harold. "I told you," he said, his voice carrying over the wind and rain. "It doesn't let you leave." Jenna screamed in frustration and terror, her voice lost in the storm. She fell to her knees, the rain soaking her to the bone, and looked up at the gas station, its windows glowing with a sinister light. As the hours passed, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the first light of dawn broke through the clouds. But for Jenna, there was no escape. She remained on her knees, staring at the gas station, her mind unraveling. Harold watched from the doorway, his expression one of sorrow and resignation. "Welcome to Harper's Gas and Service," he said softly. "You're one of us now." And so Jenna joined the ranks of those who had come before her, lost to the darkness of the abandoned gas station, forever trapped in its grip. The rain washed away her tears, but not the terror that had taken root in her heart. The gas station stood silent and still, a dark presence on the edge of the forest, waiting for its next victim. The gas station was eerily quiet as Ethan prepared for closing. The night shift at Harper's Gas and Convenience was usually uneventful, with only the occasional late-night traveler stopping by for fuel or a snack. Tonight, however, there was an unsettling stillness in the air, and the dim, fluorescent lights cast long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance on their own. Ethan glanced at the clock on the wall, 11:45 p.m. Only 15 more minutes until he could lock up and head home. He started his nightly routine, wiping down the counters and restocking the shelves. Outside, the wind howled, and the trees along the highway swayed like dark sentinels. As he moved to the front counter to organize the register, he noticed a faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from outside. He paused, listening intently. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He peered out the window, but the darkness beyond the glow of the gas station's lights revealed nothing. Just as he was about to dismiss it as a trick of the wind, the bell above the door chimed, signaling a customer. Ethan looked up and froze. Standing in the doorway was a girl, no older than 12, her clothes soaked and her hair matted with rain. She looked like she had walked straight out of a nightmare. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling slightly. The girl stepped inside, her eyes wide and filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. "I'm lost," she whispered. "Can you help me find my parents?" Ethan's heart ached at the sight of her. He walked around the counter and knelt down to her level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Alice," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Okay, Alice, let's see if we can call your parents. Do you know their phone number?" Alice shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears. Ethan led her to a chair behind the counter and handed her a towel to dry off. He picked up the phone and called the local police, explaining the situation. The dispatcher promised to send an officer right away. While they waited, Ethan tried to make Alice comfortable, offering her a cup of hot chocolate from the station's ancient coffee machine. She took it with trembling hands, her gaze fixed on the door as if expecting someone, or something, to come through at any moment. The minutes dragged on, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He noticed bruises on Alice's arms and legs, partially hidden by her wet clothes. "Alice, what happened to you?" He asked gently. She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't remember. I was with my parents, and then... darkness. I woke up in the woods, and I ran here." Ethan's stomach churned. The bell above the door chimed again, and he looked up, expecting to see the police. Instead, a man in a dark coat stood there, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat. "Is everything all right here?" the man asked, his voice low and cold. Ethan stood protectively in front of Alice. "We're fine, just waiting for the police. This girl is lost and needs help." The man stepped forward and the air grew colder. "I'll take care of her. She belongs to me." Alice's grip tightened on Ethan's arm. "No," she cried. "Please don't let him take me." Ethan's heart pounded. He reached for the baseball bat he kept under the counter for emergencies. "You need to leave now," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The man laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You don't understand, do you? She's mine. She was taken from me, and I will have her back." The lights flickered, and Ethan felt an oppressive weight in the air. The man took another step forward, and the darkness seemed to thicken around him. Ethan swung the bat, but it passed through the man as if he were made of smoke. The man lunged, and Ethan felt a cold, sharp pain as darkness engulfed him. When he opened his eyes, the gas station was silent and empty. Alice was gone, and the only sign of the struggle was the overturned chair and the spilled hot chocolate. Ethan stumbled to the phone and dialed the police again, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The police arrived within minutes, but there was little they could do. There was no trace of Alice, no sign of the man, and no evidence of what had transpired. The security cameras had malfunctioned, capturing only static. Ethan was questioned and eventually released, but he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him. He returned to the gas station the next night, unable to stay away. As the clock neared midnight, he heard the faint, rhythmic tapping again. This time, he didn't look up when the bell chimed. He knew who it would be. "Alice?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The girl stepped inside, her clothes soaked and her hair matted with rain. She looked at him with those same wide, fearful eyes. "I'm lost," she whispered. "Can you help me find my parents?" Ethan nodded, tears streaming down his face. He knew he was trapped in a nightmare that would never end. Each night, the same events would unfold, and each night he would fail to protect her. As the darkness closed in around him, Ethan realized that some horrors are inescapable, and some souls are forever bound to the shadows.